Okay, let's dive into something pretty fascinating. We've got one island, two different countries, and two school systems that are, well, worlds apart. It's like a natural experiment in education, and honestly, the results might just surprise you. So let's get right into it.
So you gotta wonder, right? How can two places sharing such a small piece of land have such wildly different ideas about how to educate their kids? And more importantly, what does that actually mean for the students growing up inside these two very different systems?
And here it is. This is the single biggest fork in the road. In Northern Ireland, at the tender age of 11, a single test can basically decide your entire educational path. But just hop across the border into the Republic of Ireland, and things are completely different. Students just move on to their local secondary school. No massive life-altering exam.
And this isn't just some small detail in education policy. This one single difference, that test at age 11, it creates these huge ripple effects that shape, well, everything. We're talking about the types of schools that even exist, all the way to how students end up performing years and years later. So, let's break that down. How exactly does one test create two completely different school structures? This is really where you start to see the two systems go their separate ways.
So, check this out. In Northern Ireland, a huge 42% of students go to what are called selective grammar schools. The whole system is basically split in two. You're either in a school that picked you because of your test scores, or you're not. And this isn't some small niche program. We're talking about nearly half of all students.
And there's a name for this. It's called academic selection. The whole idea is simple, really. How you do on that one test determines if you get a spot in a grammar school. And believe me, the debate over whether this is fair or if it even works is at the absolute heart of education in Northern Ireland. Now, let's flip over to the Republic of Ireland. It's a totally different picture. You've got a mix of schools, voluntary ones, often with a religious background, vocational schools that are more skills-focused, and then state-run community schools. But here's the key. Almost all of them are non-selective. Kids aren't sorted by academic ability at age 11, and that creates a completely different classroom environment. Okay, so we've seen how the systems are built, but what's it actually like to be a student in them? Let's trace the journey they take, from that very first day of secondary school all the way to graduation day. In the Republic, students usually start secondary school a bit later, around 12 or 13. They go through a 3-year junior cycle and then a senior cycle that lasts 2 or 3 years. It all builds up to one final, massive, high-stakes exam, the famous Leaving Certificate, or as everyone calls it, the Leaving Cert.
Now in Northern Ireland, the journey looks a lot more like the one in the rest of the UK. Students start at 11, work their way through key stages, and then they hit their first big set of exams at age 16, the GCSEs. After that, they have the choice to stay on for 2 more years, which is called sixth form, to do their A-levels, and those are absolutely crucial if you want to go to university.
So this really shows you where the pressure points are. In the Republic, it's like all the pressure gets funneled into that one monster exam at the very end. In Northern Ireland, it's more spread out. You've got a major hurdle at 16 with GCSEs, and then another big one for anyone who goes on to do A-levels. Okay, so we've got two different structures, two different journeys for students, which leads us to, well, probably the most important question of all. What are the actual results? How do students really do in these systems? And this question, this gets right to the very heart of the whole debate. The argument for selection is that it helps the highest achieving students fly. But the data makes us ask a really tough question. Does a system that sorts kids at age 11 actually lead to better results for everybody?
Well, the answer, at least when you look at this number, is pretty shocking. The rate of early school leaving, that's young people who leave with only basic qualifications, is more than double in Northern Ireland compared to the Republic. That is a staggering gap, 14% versus only 6%.
And just to be clear, this isn't a one-off finding. As the Irish Times points out, it's a consistent pattern. The number of students who leave school with minimal qualifications is just significantly and consistently higher in Northern Ireland's selective system. And that trend doesn't stop there. It continues right on up to higher education. The data shows that the system in the Republic of Ireland doesn't just lose fewer students along the way. It also gets more of them into university and other third-level education in the end. That's true for young adults and for the population as a whole. So where does this all leave us? To wrap things up, let's zoom out for a second and look at the future and the challenges that both of these systems are facing. So let's do a quick recap of the big differences. The Republic starts a bit later, it's non-selective, and everything builds towards one final exam. The North starts earlier, uses that academic selection test, and has that 2-stage exam process.
But the really critical outcome we've seen is that the Republic's non-selective approach leads to a much, much lower rate of early school leaving. The differences even go down to how the schools are funded, which is a whole other story.
But for all their differences, they aren't living in separate worlds. Both systems are wrestling with the exact same modern problems. How do we fund our schools properly? How do we tackle inequality? How do we prepare our kids for jobs that don't even exist yet? And maybe the biggest one, what's the future of exams?
And that really brings us to our final thought here. The data really seems to suggest that a system built around selection at age 11 might create some very high-achieving schools, but it also seems to be correlated with a much larger group of students getting left behind. Which leaves us with a pretty fundamental question to think about. If a system is designed to create clear winners, is it inevitable that it also has to create losers?